In the previous section, we have seen these categories section coming from the API endpoint. Now in this section, we are going to make an API endpoint for these products. So the first thing we are going to do is we will create a table in MySQL. We'll add some data into it, and then we will create the Node API endpoint in this section. Now to create the table, in previous section, I have used CLI. In this section, I'm going to use the workbench, that is the GUI for MySQL. So let me open the workbench where I'm going to create the table. Now this will appear an easier way compared to the CLI where you have to type the command. Now here you see that there is a local instance available. In case if you do not have this, then you have this MySQL connections where you click on it, then you will see this form where you can add the connection. So let's do that. I'm going to create a new connection with some respective data. Host name, I'm going to say localhost. The port will be whatever. You define the username, and here you give the password. Now you see that the connection is successfully done. So here is the new connection created. Now I have clicked on schema, and here you see that we have eStore. Now let's create a table which is going to hold the product data. So I'll say create table. You define the table name. I'll say products. And now I'm going to define the field names here. So now this table is created. Now I'm going to say apply here. It shows the query. Here also I can update few things. So let's say I want to add auto increment. And again I'll say apply. So this creates the table. So earlier we created categories table. Now we have product where we are going to store the product data. The images will be stored as a path, but all the images will be residing on the server. Now let's insert few records. So now it says that one row affected. Now let's check whether the record is added or not. I'll say select query. And I'm selecting to run only this query. So now you see that the data is inserted. Now similar way, I'm going to add few records, changing the values. Now let's run the select statement. to see how many records we have. And now you see that we have the data list prepared. So we are done with MySQL. Now the next step is that we are going to work on the API endpoint, which will fetch the data from this table and it will send to the client. I'm going to the server side code where I've defined the routes. We already have this product.js file. If I click on this, you see that we tried product categories here. Now in the same file, I'm going to define the product as well. So there will be again one more route. There will be one more get request, which I'm configuring here. So the route will be get products. Now I'll just copy and paste whatever we saw in the previous session from the categories, and then we will make related changes. Now here the query will be different. It is from the products table. So now we are done with the API endpoint. Now let's just check whether this API endpoint is correctly configured or not. Instead of product categories, I'll say product, get products, that is. Now let's run the server and check the data again. Now you see that the get request is working fine with the browser. So this API endpoint and MySQL work is done for products. Now in next section, we are going to configure this data inside our React application.